Well, new questions tonight about a just-released audio tape from President Bill Clinton discussing how he could have killed Osama bin Laden but decided not to. The comments caught on tape in 2001 were made just hours before the September 11th attacks.
And I'm just saying, if I were Osama bin Laden, he's a very smart guy. I spent a lot of time thinking about him. And I nearly got him once. I nearly got him. And I could have killed him, but I would have had to destroy a little town called Kandahar in Afghanistan and kill 300 innocent women and children. And then I would have been no better than him. And so I didn't do it.
Gary Berntsen served as a CIA chief of station during the Clinton administration. He was inside the spy agency's clandestine service under Bill Clinton. He was also the architect of the Battle of Tora Bora, where most of bin Laden's forces were destroyed before bin Laden himself escaped into Pakistan. Gary, a pleasure to speak with you tonight. Thank you so much for your time. And so your reaction to President Clinton's comments?
Well, of course, President Clinton's comments are, somewhere in a fantasy land. Let me just say this. During that period of the 1990s, in CTC where I was, you had the chief of counterterrorism, the deputy, and there were three major op groups. Mr. Michael Scheuer ran the bin Laden shop, I ran the Hezbollah shop, and another man ran a group called Regional Terrorist Branch. Michael Scheuer and his people set up more than half a dozen opportunities to kill bin Laden or capture him, and Bill Clinton would never pull the trigger. Clinton would never do it, time and time again, and it was disgraceful.
So it wasn't just, your point is, it wasn't just this one time that he's recalling where he says, I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to take out civilians, so that would have made me no better than him. It was many times.
According to Scheuer, no one would have been killed on that evening. According to Scheuer, bin Laden was in an isolated area of a hotel and that he could have been hit with a missile and killed him without that. But, Clinton demonstrated cowardliness during his period of time. And I will add, in 1996, we had Khobar Towers attack on the United States, and we had, 17 soldiers killed, over 400 injured, and the Clinton administration did everything possible to suppress the knowledge that Iran was involved in that. They did everything possible to hide the fact that Iranians murdered Americans because the administration was afraid to act against Iran. Only Louis Freeh, several years later, was really my hero by stepping up and making this public, or the Clintons would have held that and suppressed that forever.
President Clinton's defenders, because this has been out for about a day or so, have said, look, hindsight's 20/20. And we didn't particularly understand the bin Laden threat at the time Bill Clinton was making those decisions the way we do today.
His supporters didn't understand it, but we understood it, and the Clinton administration should have understood it. They're damn fools.
President Bush takes heat as well because he was informed about the growing threat of al-Qaeda and bin Laden and the risk of them using airplanes against us shortly before the 9/11 attacks. Do you condemn him as well?
Without a doubt. Look, the Bush administration failed in the first 9 months to even do a meeting with Dick Clark, who had been a very capable CT guy down at the White House and did a lot of coordinating for us. And I had a lot of respect for Dick Clark. Dick Clark wrote a couple of very good books. He's a real patriot. I'm a fan of the guy. But the fact is the Bush administration missed it, too, in its first 9 months. Once we had the attack, they stepped up. They did some very good work in the beginning. They made mistakes, too. People make mistakes in war. But, the Bush administration failed also in its first months.
You think the Clinton mistakes, though, were ideologically driven? I mean, explain that.
No, I don't think it was ideologically.
Well, you're saying in the one case they were afraid, they didn't want to take on Iran. Why wouldn't they go after bin Laden?
He just wouldn't take those types of risks. Look, he ran for office saying it's the economy, stupid. That's what he was driven by, domestic politics. And in this sort of thing, he just, this was something happening far away. He hoped it wouldn't interfere with his domestic political agenda, and that was it. I mean, it was something that got short shrift. We were taking huge risks in CIA. We were working very, very hard to protect the country. We gave the country half a dozen opportunities to eliminate bin Laden before 9/11. And because that president failed to act and the next president failed to recognize the problem, 3,000 Americans died in New York.
Wow.
And in Washington and Pennsylvania.
Gary, I want to stand you by because we have a defender of President Clinton's. I want to get his thought, but I don't want you to leave. But joining me now is Lanny Davis. He's former special counsel to President Clinton and author of the book Crisis Tales. Lanny, what do you make of what Gary's saying? Gary served the nation honorably. He's done a lot to help us out, and you can hear he's displeased with both of the prior two presidents.
Well, it's pretty sad. I certainly honor his service. He omits facts, and he engages in name-calling and accuses people of bad motives. At least he accuses both presidents. He's about the only perfect one that doesn't have the wisdom of hindsight, I guess. Gary forgets to mention that the CIA trained Osama bin Laden as part of a CIA operation to stop the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He forgot to mention that fact, but the wisdom of hindsight allows me to say that. He also forgets to mention that the 9/11 Commission discussed the Kandahar situation, and they found that, in fact, Osama bin Laden had already left. He forgot to mention the 9/11 Commission finding. And finally, President Clinton certainly did attack and try to kill Osama bin Laden and sent in, I believe, a cruise missile and just missed. He forgot to mention that. So when somebody who has his honorable service attacks people's motives and with the wisdom of hindsight gets personal about two presidents, I would suggest to him that he's dishonoring the great service that I do say that he gave to our country. Because I have great admiration for the CIA.
Gary has a right to his opinion, Larry. Lanny.
Oh, no, I'm just saying omitting facts, of course.
But his credentials
But
are
attacking people's motives are different than an opinion.
He is saying that he's challenging the assertion by Bill Clinton that was the time he had to get him, and that the reason he didn't go in there was because he didn't want to hurt civilians. Gary doesn't believe that, but he's also pointing out that he believes that there were half a dozen opportunities that Bill Clinton had to get bin Laden that he did not seize upon, perhaps because he just didn't want to take that on. He was focused on the economy, didn't want to go after it.
I gave you three facts that he omitted, so he was incomplete. I'm not attacking his motives. I honor his service to our country. I have a great deal of admiration for the CIA. They made a mistake, and he's not going to disagree, that the Mujahideen that was sent into Afghanistan was one of them trained by CIA was Osama bin Laden. But I wouldn't criticize the CIA. At the time, it looked like the right thing to do to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. All I suggest is that rather than saying that he was motivated because it was the economy stupid and he didn't care, give him the benefit of the doubt that he was probably very regretful. He did try to kill Osama bin Laden and he just missed him. And Gary didn't mention that. I'm just pointing out the omissions suggest a biased perspective, but I still very much honor what he's done for our country.
Well, and I mean, there's, as I pointed out to Gary, Bill Clinton, none of us were looking at bin Laden, at least none of us outside the CIA. Gary had different information. We're looking at bin Laden back then the way we see him today.
Exactly. And I'm sure that President Clinton regrets greatly not killing bin Laden, and certainly, can you imagine how he felt? I hope that Gary agrees that Bill Clinton probably felt awful, the way the whole world...
And the way George Bush felt.
Of course. So it's one thing to say, isn't it a shame that he didn't kill Osama bin Laden when he could? He'd agree with that. But then to attack him personally and to say that's something to do with politics and calling a man a coward who's a president of the United States and who exposes himself to assassination every day is just something unbecoming of what I'm sure was a great career at the CIA.
All right, Lanny Davis, thanks for coming on. I just want to I want to get back to Gary because I want to get your final word on that to see whether do we have him? Yeah. Let me just give you the final word on that, sir.
Sure. Listen, I think Lanny's a wonderful guy. I've met Lanny Davis. He may not recall that. But let me just say that the CIA never trained Osama bin Laden. He was a member of Maktab al-Khidmat, the services organization that served under Abdullah Azzam. And you had Abdullah Azzam, you had bin Laden, you had Zawahiri, and you had a fellow by the name of Mohammed Saeed. Lanny sadly doesn't know the specifics all of this. He gave you a very general response. I know the specifics. I live the specifics. And CIA officers died out in the field, as did U.S. military people, because of the failure of our leadership in the United States. Both political parties are guilty of failing to protect the country at times. And I'm sure Clinton feels very, very bad about this, but he performed badly. And I'll add, finally, during the Clinton administration, maybe Lanny would like to explain why the National Security Advisor, Sandy Berger, went into the archives, started cutting things up, and actually was fined $50,000 and lost his security clearances for this. Why did Clinton's National Security Advisor go in there to cut things up to hide what occurred during that administration in terms of protecting us? I'd just like to have that answer.
All right. Well, we will leave that for another day. Gary, thank you very much for being here.
You're very welcome.
All right, we're taking your